Good morning. Welcome. Thanks for coming, everybody. Today we have a very special guest. The end at this moment of a long line of great guest directors that we've had here at Hendrix as part of our theater arts department and the Hendrix Murphy programs. One of my most vivid memories in 1985 was working with Fred Cebulski when he came in, and I've been very fortunate as a designer over the years to get to work with all these great folks, and our department and our students have certainly benefited tremendously because of this program. And we've really had a great time working with Freddie on the Laramie project. Freddie is from Atlanta, Georgia. That's where he lives now. He's the artistic director of Actors Express in Atlanta, a really terrific, aggressive, edgy theater in Atlanta that's recently, if you go and you Google theater in Atlanta, I'm sure you'll find Freddie and Actors Express all over it. They've had a really interesting run of their latest show. The Laramie Project opens this next Wednesday. It runs through Saturday, and we hope that you'll all come. And really appreciate Freddie being here with us today. Freddie, get up here.
Thank you, Danny, and thanks to everybody here at Hendrix. I've been having a really great time working on the Laramie Project here at the school. I want to say a big special thanks to obviously all of the theater faculty here, Ann Muse, of course, Connie Campbell, Danny Grace, Caleb Moore, and of course Bridget Rogers, who's not been around for the process, but everyone should know that Bridget was my roommate in graduate school. We shared a tiny little garage apartment, and I won't tell you what went on there because the stories I have on her, she has just as many on me. But also a big thanks to everyone here at Hendrix Murphy and the Murphy House, Henrietta and Sarah, and Hope, who I just refer to as Joy for some reason. But everyone here has been so welcoming and so hospitable, and I'm just having a great time being here. And so thank you to everybody. Thank you for being here this morning. I wanted to talk first about the play, The Laramie Project, and sort of how it came to be. Many of you who are in the room who have been involved in the production, you know a lot of this information, but some of you, this is going to be new for you. In October of 1998, October 6th to be exact, Matthew Shepard, a student at the University of Wyoming in Laramie, was kidnapped and beaten and left tied to a fence in the middle of nowhere. He was discovered about 18 hours later by a local student who was out biking on his mountain bike, and was taken to a local hospital and then to a larger hospital in Fort Collins down the way where they could better attend to his significant injuries. And he died 6 days later. Those 6 days became something of a flashpoint in our nation and in the world, and it became a huge turning point in the LGBT movement. You know, there are thousands of hate crimes a year, but for some reason, that particular one captured the imagination of the country and the world. And, you know, there are lots of theories as to why, but I think often when a single event taps into the zeitgeist and opens up a larger conversation, it's because the world is ready for it at that point. The world might not have been ready to have that conversation 5 years prior or 10 years prior. But the world at that point, where we were culturally, we were ready to have that conversation. Think about the late 90s. Will and Grace was popular at that point. Ellen had just come out of the closet, which was, for those of you who were students and you don't have any clue how big a deal that was. That was massive. People thought she'd killed her career. It was top of mind for people. And along comes the Matthew Shepard incident. And so a conversation about hate began to percolate in a very real way at the national level. Not long thereafter, Matthew Shepard's mother, Judy, became a really vocal advocate for hate crimes legislation and for LGBT rights and LGBT awareness. A hate crime bill was introduced not long thereafter in Congress to honor Matthew Shepard, but also to make hate crimes based on sexual orientation a federal offense. It didn't make it at that point, even though it had the backing of President Clinton, and it became something of a political volleyball for the next several years. And finally, the hate crimes bill passed and was signed into law by President Obama in 2009. So it took 11 years for that conversation to coalesce into legislation at the federal level. Now, the Laramie Project itself came about during that time, during that immediate time in the aftermath of Matthew Shepard's killing. And the Tectonic Theater Project decided to travel to Laramie. All this gets actually explained in the play. Abby explains it all in her very first monologue of the show. But the Tectonic Theater Project is a very interesting company in New York, and they've done quite a few plays that take existing texts and translate them somehow into a theatrical experience. The first notable one being a play called Gross Indecency, The Three Trials of Oscar Wilde, which took transcripts from Oscar Wilde's Indecency trial and turned them into a play. It was very successful. They are responsible also for I Am My Own Wife, which was the Tony and Pulitzer winner a few years ago, that S. Kaufman directed, that I saw in New York. It was one of the greatest theater-going experiences of my life. A play called 33 Variations that Moises Kaufman wrote and directed that starred Jane Fonda on Broadway and got a slew of Tony nominations, including one for her. But the Laramie Project has been perhaps their most enduring because it has had thousands of performances, thousands and thousands of performances. And the way they approached the work is they went to Laramie in those days following the beating and had conversations with local townspeople, the citizens of the community. They looked at transcripts of news reports. They returned to Laramie a year later for the trial of his murderers, and were sort of checking in what's going on now, how is this affecting the community. And the result was this play that's not a play about the Matthew Shepard murder. It's a play about how a community learns to come together in the aftermath of a terrible event, and how do they metabolize that tragedy and turn it into a way forward. And how do they search for love, understanding, forgiveness, compassion, these ideals that we say we want, but sometimes find can be in short supply when we need them the most. And Laramie came together in a way to do just that, to find them. And so the play is a celebration of that. And so that's a little bit of background about the play. Now, why Laramie here at Hendrix, and why me? Why me? Bridget called me last spring to ask me if I was interested in coming out to Hendrix to be a guest director here, and I was interested in the opportunity. I hadn't directed anything in a college campus in quite a long time, and I was itching to do something else in a college setting. But the play wasn't selected yet, so I came out to Hendrix at that time. I met with the theater, arts, and dance faculty. I met with students. I met with the provost at the time, and a lot of other people from the campus community. And we were brainstorming that day about plays, and I had come with a list of possible ideas, and we were thinking pretty broadly at that time. I don't remember exactly what was on my list. I don't know if you remember, Ann, but I had some classics on the list. I had some comedies on the list, and nothing felt imperative that was on the list. And so we were having a conversation. We were in this very room, actually, having a conversation around lunch. And as the conversation evolved in terms of the kind of work the students were interested in, the kind of work the college might be interested in, and actually had that. She said, what about the Laramie Project? And it was, you have those moments sometimes where everything just sort of locks into place. And it was after, yes, that has to be it. And there was something about it that felt so right that I thought this is a great opportunity to talk about community at the college level and see how it relates to our world today. And so I started then thinking about how I would approach the gig here at Hendrix. Because anytime you approach any kind of directing job, you always think about who's the audience, what are we doing it for? And often I'm working at my theater in Atlanta with my audience there, and I've spent the last 8 years trying to really understand and burrow inside what are their expectations, what do they want, where can they be challenged, where do they want to be challenged, where are they hesitant to be challenged. Coming into a new situation, you're sort of doing that investigative work on the fly. But it's important work to do because you have to understand how the work is going to be relevant to the specific community that you're serving at a specific moment in time. So I was just giving that some thought, some pretty general, broad thought, and that ultimately came to bear first on production choices and conversations with Danny talking about scenery and lights, and conversations with Connie about costumes. We were talking, for example, about I want the students not necessarily to feel like 1998 people, but I want the students of Hendrix to be able to walk into the theater and see themselves reflected on stage. Danny had a great experience at Crystal Bridges being inspired by this piece of art that really evoked a sense of space and vastness that we wanted to capture in the physical production. So all of that conversation was going along really nicely. And I was continuing to think about, well, how do you approach this kind of play in this kind of community? And I had some expectations that got really upended, because at first, when I would tell friends and colleagues of mine, yeah, I'm going out next spring to Arkansas to direct the Laramie Project, people's reactions were, oh. And that had never occurred to me that it could be a problem in rural Arkansas, but it could be. In fact, this is a play that still gets picketed sometimes by the Westboro Baptist Church, And to me, I think getting picketed by the Westboro Baptist Church would be a sign of great honor. But that was so. My initial thoughts were, gosh, I'm going to be in this really conservative environment. Maybe we're going to have to really be careful about this, that, and the other thing. And then I talked with Bridget last fall about some of the conversations that came forth last semester at the campus level, and looking at how content interfaces with the student population and with the campus community. And so I started thinking, wait a second, I've been thinking about how to approach this play in completely the wrong way. I don't have to worry about people being offended that they're going to hear the word gay mentioned on stage. I don't have to be worried that people are going to feel that some sort of liberal agenda is being crammed down the liberal agenda of compassion and love and forgiveness and understanding. But what I began to discover was that there was a conversation brewing at the campus level about how people interface with content that they could find challenging. And so what happened was there was this conversation at the department level. And I have to say, at times, a pretty spirited conversation at the faculty and student level about how we talk about the work. And I started thinking about how I approached my own work generally back in Atlanta, and thought, well, okay, what are the overlaps here? Because one of the things that is very important to me as a theater maker and as a producer is audience engagement. How do we engage with the audiences whom we serve? And it's something that has been top of mind for me really for the last 7 or 8 years, but really for the last 4.5, 5 years, Because we found, you know, back in 2011, my theater almost closed down. We were in the midst of a very significant financial crisis. And so we did a lot of investigating, and we had a really rigorous strategic planning process. And what we learned was we have to understand how to engage with audiences about the work. You know, for a long time, theater makers have been wringing their hands over how does theater compete in the digital age? How can theater compete with Twitter? How can theater compete with on-demand video? Well, people asked the same questions back in the 50s. How can theater compete with television? And it did just fine. How can theater compete with movies? You know, 30 years prior to that, it did just fine. So the conversation isn't about how does theater compete with these other forms, but the conversation is about, given how our culture has evolved and what the expectations are of the people that we're aiming to serve, how do we serve them in that way? How do we speak that language? Because look, theater's not going anywhere. Theater's not going to die. That craving, that innate human craving for the live event of theater is always going to be there. It's been there since the dawn of mankind, and every single civilization since the dawn of mankind, not just ancient Greece. That's a very Western-centric way of looking at it. So, how do we then say, okay, what is the environment? What is the community dynamic here? What are people craving? And one of the things it means is the days of being able to just put up a play and say, we're doing it and people will come see it, gone. They don't exist anymore. That's not a good thing, it's not a bad thing, it just is. And to ignore that is to do so at your own peril. And there are a lot of theaters that have closed down because they didn't respond to the shifting ground beneath their feet. And you could also say, well, God, it's something we've got to contend with. I think that's also potentially losing an opportunity to look at how you are relevant to the people that you claim to be relevant to. And so we started thinking about how does a theater engage in social media, which is a digital form that keeps people separate, when theater is about bringing people together into a shared experience. Well, it's just speaking a different kind of language. It's taking the conversation to a platform that gives people an opportunity to discuss it in a way and in a forum that they know. And so my theater has become extremely active on social media. We went through Twitter and Facebook especially. And what we have seen is the conversation about our work has skyrocketed in our community. We also start thinking about, well, how do we engage with people who are coming in the door? It's not just about open the door, do a show, come see the play, clap, go home. What is the experience of seeing the show, and how do we facilitate conversation about the show? There is an audience engagement guru of sorts named Allie Halsworth, who I've heard speak on a couple of occasions, and she's someone who I think is a revolutionary thinker in the field of audience engagement. She used to be the marketing director at Woolly Mammoth Theater in DC. She's worked with Theater Development Fund in New York. If you've ever stood in line at the TKTS booth and those peppy, attractive young millennials with the iPads come up to you and chat with you, that's all part of her initiatives that she instituted to make that experience more enjoyable for those particular patrons. And so she, I heard her speak a couple of years ago, and she talked about the way every theater interfaces with every single patron on any given production. And she came up with what she calls a patron service map. There are 14 points at which the theater touches a single patron. I'm going to write them down for you now. The first is exposure. The moment the person hears about the play, maybe they get an ad, maybe they get an email, maybe they hear about it in a conversation, maybe they see a tweet about it. They hear about the play. And that can come in so many different forms, as I said. The second point is research, which can be self-selective, and a theater can do things to facilitate. Maybe an email includes a link to a site that might offer additional information about the show. Maybe the person sees, oh, there's a review that's been written. I'll go read the review and see what the critic might have said. I will go and look for more tweets about the play. I will see if anything's been written about the actors or the director. The degree to which people do that is pretty self-selective, but the theater can facilitate it and encourage it. 3, the moment of purchase. Do they buy their tickets on the phone? Do they buy their tickets on the internet? What is the internet experience? You know, we did a thing where we tried to shift all of our sales to online sales because we're very short-staffed and we just didn't have the people to answer the phones. And so what we did was very simple. We said, you save $2 if you buy online, which really meant we added a $2 fee if you called on the phone, and we didn't charge that fee if you bought online. In a single season, we went from, I would say, 45 to 50% of our sales online to over 90% of our sales online in a single season. Now that said, we switched ticketing systems and the customer interface became pretty crappy. And so we had lots of frustrated patrons saying, I'm trying to buy a ticket, calling saying, I'm trying to buy a ticket and I can't get your site to work. We're fixing that. We're switching ticketing systems. So the fourth is transportation. Is it easy to get to the theater? Is your theater accessible to public transit? Does your theater have parking available and plentiful? Is the person going to have to walk through a dark, bad neighborhood to get to the door and feel unsafe? Are there going to be long lines to get into the parking deck? How is the person going to get there? That's going to be part of their experience seeing the show. And so what steps can you take to make that more pleasant? Pre-show activity. Are there any things in the lobby, musicians, activities, patrons staying there to ask questions? Patrons being able to ask questions of docents or staff members there. Are there pre-show activities that have been done digitally? Are there audience engagement activities that you're doing over social media, or over email, surveys, or content? We did a seminar play that you guys also did here. We held a fiction contest, and there was a prize for the winning contest. We had a panel of judges, and so patrons were submitting short stories to the contest. You know, it was a way of getting people engaged before the show. Entering the venue. Is your venue nice? Is it clean? Does your physical space reflect who you are as a theater? Or are you saying, we're this classy, amazing theater and our building looks like a dump? Or is it hard to find and navigate once you get inside? How's the signage? That's part of the patron experience. Ticket pickup. Are your ticket agents helpful? Are they friendly? Is the process seamless and quick? Do they have to stand in line for 10 minutes? Is the person at the box office window clueless? What is the patron experience going to be at that point? Getting to your seats. If it's assigned seating, has the computer seated 2 different people in the same seat? That could be a problem. Do you have ushers helping people find their seats in a friendly manner? If it's a general admission house, do you have someone there You know, when it gets crowded, to make sure that, oh, we have 2 seats together here, but we have 2 separates here. How do you assist the patrons in a way that is not frustrating and in a way that, again, welcomes them into the experience? At number 9 is the performance itself. Look how many places you've already touched a patron before they even see the show. But I think number 9 is also pretty self-explanatory. Is the show done well? Is it right for the audience? You know, how are the seats? Are they comfortable? Or are people going to be complaining? You know, I get a few complaints in my theater about the seats, although I think they're pretty comfortable, but some people don't. Intermission. What's the intermission experience? Your bathroom's clean? The line at the bar going to be handled in a smooth way? Is the box office window going to be open in case people have questions about something else, or they want to renew their subscription, or they have a question about after the show? Maybe it's a patron who needs arrangements made for a cab. You know, what is the intermission experience going to be for the audience? Post-show activity. Is there something organized and facilitated that's relevant to the content of the show? A talkback is a really common one. What about something less structured? What about, for example, we did a play a few years ago called Bloody Bloody Andrew Jackson, which is a musical that takes Andrew Jackson and reimagines him as a renegade rock star. Part of the experience of the show was we did a fairly environmental production of it, and there was a working bar on stage with bar service during the show. And we thought, well, this show, there are a lot of ideas at work in the show, a lot of very big ideas, in fact, about history and about America and about the nature of what we expect from our leaders, to say nothing of the issues of how do we understand this single man. And so what we did, instead of having organized talkbacks, which we often do, we said, let's just open the bar and let people hang out and drink. The whole show is a party atmosphere. And so we said to the cast, we can't require you, because the union won't let us, we can't require you to stay and do a talkback. But I'll tell you what, if you'll stay and hang out with the cast after you get into your street clothes out of costume, we'll let you drink free at the bar. 100% participation, everyone. And so what happened was, you had patrons and artists connecting in a very casual way, and conversations about the work itself were happening in very unstructured ways, which was appropriate for that particular show. We also had things in the lobby that were interactive, that we do for a lot of our shows, and that was, we had a board with 3 questions, and you could write down your thoughts and put them. And one was, because there's a song in the show called Populism, Yeah, Yeah. And so we had one question that was populism, yeah, yeah, or no, no. And I can't remember the second question off the top of my head. It was something that was very serious about American history. And then we decided we wanted to do a really cheeky question because of the nature of the show. And so the third question was, which American president would you most want to sleep with? Which that actually got the most responses. Kennedy ranked very high. Yeah. And so not only did the content of the activity have relevance to the show, the way we actually executed it was relevant to the show as well, which is very important. Exiting the venue. This has actually been something that's been really top of mind for my theater lately, because we do have a new parking deck at our theater, and our landlord's built it. It's a great deck and it accommodates a lot of patrons, but the system of getting out can sometimes be really slow, and we had patrons who were waiting a half an hour in their car to get out of the parking deck. So we said, well, no, we have to nip this in the bud or they won't come back. You know, we work too hard to do a great show to have people go home frustrated, you know? So we've switched up how we sell the parking passes. We have a staff person on site at the little automated machine after every show, making sure it goes smoothly. Boom, next thing you know, parking problem solved. People are out of the parking deck in 10 minutes, everybody's happy. And so they get to focus their attention then on talking about the play on the way home. But so how are you interfacing with your patrons there? You have to think about that too. Transportation. Again, how are they getting home? Are you dealing with tourists who you're having to call cabs for? Are you, again, the public transit question, what if the bus schedule doesn't sync up with your show schedule? That sort of thing. And then the last point is post-show communication. We send an email to every patron after they see a show that invites them to submit a review online to our website, which we don't edit. We moderate them, and we don't post everyone that gets submitted for obvious reasons. But we don't edit the ones that we do post. We thank them for coming. We don't try to sell them anything at that point. It's just a point of connection, and now we're giving you an opportunity to give us some more feedback. So all of those points are points at which we touch a patron about the show. Now, they're not all relevant to every theater and every situation. Like, for example, a lot of these are not relevant here. You're not dealing with a lot of transportation issues. You know, people are leaving their dorms and walking across campus. But what this said to me was, okay, how do we think about the ways in which we do touch the patrons of this play, which are by and large students, faculty members, members of the campus community. And how can we have conversations about the work that open the work up to the community as opposed to create barriers to the work in the community? And I think the department has had some very interesting and fruitful conversations about that in terms of outreach to student organizations, in terms of there was a really long debate about how to word the advisory on the poster. And in the process of that conversation, which was at times exciting and at times frustrating, there was, at the end of the day, a very good conversation about how do we interface with the community that we serve. All of that is to the positive. And so I thought a lot about that, and I have continued to think a lot about that with this play, because what more perfect play than the Laramie Project to open up those conversations? It's a play about community. It's a play about learning how to understand each other differently. It's a play to try to understand how might we look at the same thing from a different point of view and still have common ground, which is a layer of discourse that I find sorely lacking in our culture anyway. And so to have a play that pushes that conversation to the forefront requires an approach to that play in kind. And so I've been really impressed with how the department has adapted to this play and how those campus level conversations are unfolding. And it's a real honor to be part of it. And it's a real honor to be part of bringing this play to life. I have no idea how we're doing on time, but I want to make sure.
You're good. You've got over 10 minutes.
Oh, great, because I wanted to leave about 10 minutes for any questions that anybody might have for me about all the things, the audience engagement that we've talked about, but also if you have questions about our process or about the play itself, I'd be happy to take any of those questions. Does anyone have anything they would like to ask?
I'll ask Freddie. Laramie Ferguson, something on your mind, off the agenda?
Well, we haven't talked about Ferguson specifically or directly in the rehearsal process. But, you know, Ferguson, again, was an event that a lot of people were divided on, that tapped into the zeitgeist. There was a conversation about race that we hadn't been having in this country that Ferguson revealed we need to have. And we need to have in a way that is open-hearted and in a way that, you know, we have to be ready to sort of confront our demons. And, you know, I think that Ferguson was one of those moments, as was the Matthew Shepard moment.
Yeah.
I don't know yet because it's still relatively new. We'll see how it coalesces into a larger conversation over time. But I think that you're starting to see I'm starting to see a lot more people willing to stand up and say, no, that's out of bounds. There was this thing just at the Oscars. In addition to the whole thing being about, you know, like all these white nominees, but two things about the event itself. The really terrible joke that Sean Penn made at the end about the director getting a green card.
Wow.
Would he have made that joke about a British-born director or a French-born director? Why is that joke about a green card about a Mexican-born American director? That revealed something ugly. And Sean Penn's a great actor. But he said a really stupid thing that revealed a larger issue at work. Then you had the of all places for this conversation to erupt into, a show that I actually am a little ashamed to admit that I'm a fan of, E's Fashion Police. But one of the commentators on the show, there was a young lady, an attendee at the Oscars, and she was wearing dreads. And she looked gorgeous, by the way. Beautiful young actress. And this commentator on E's Fashion Police says, oh, she looks like she smells of weed and patchouli. Because she has dreads? Why is that okay to make that kind of crass, generalized comment about a young African-American woman with dreads? And, you know, was the joke funny? Well, that's up to anybody listening to the joke to decide for themselves. But what it revealed was something larger about how we perceive people, what it's okay, or what we think it's okay to joke about, and then people who have frankly had enough of it and said, no, I'm not going to stand for that. That's not to say that that person on Fashion Police or that Sean Penn are bad people, but they made jokes that revealed a lack of understanding on their part, and now they're having to go back and figure out how either to apologize and make amends for it and move forward or whatever, and that's on them to do. But yeah, I think those are the kinds of events that we're going to start seeing more of. Just as after 1998, the LGBT movement had had enough. I would never have thought in a million years we would be this close to gay marriage in this country nationally. Because also 1998, remember, that's about 2 or 3 years after the Defense of Marriage Act, which a lot of people thought, well, that's the nail in the coffin, even though I don't think anybody ever really expected to pass constitutional muster. But it seemed like forces against that issue were winning. And the people who were fighting from underneath it found this moment and said, you know what, enough. Same thing is happening as a result of Ferguson, I think. I think we're going to see those conversations unfold. And I think it's ultimately all going to be to the positive. You know, you hear people often say history bends toward progress, or at least the history of this country has always been one that bends toward progress. And I think that Ferguson is a great example of how that will continue to evolve. And then we'll see in 10 years what other conversations emerge, what other people are feeling underrepresented or oppressed or discriminated against, and will there be events that coalesce those people into a movement? And there probably will be. That tends to be the nature of how our country unfolds.
Have you found any other artistic venues that are working with this idea, especially the Layering Project? because I'm having flashbacks to Melissa Etheridge and her song that she wrote about this. Have you just come along any other sorts of?
We haven't really thought about the artistic, the direct artistic references. We haven't really been concerned in the process with that. What we've been talking about, especially what Danny and Andrew, our sound designer, have talked about, looking at how the music unfolds in the play, is thinking about how the music evokes the sense of place and what is the emotional resonance of the event, and how, and the three of us have worked pretty collaboratively to find specific pieces of music that support the emotional moment that we're dealing with, which will help us tell the story. But in terms of finding direct pop culture or artistic references to the event, that's not something that we've been necessarily with our process of putting the show on. Yes, Ira?
So part of the Layman project is its really intimate nature with the moment structure and a lot of very personal characters that are kind of right there with the audience. So oftentimes it's done in like small spaces, right, where you have your row of chairs and the audience is right there, and it's a very intimate experience. And have there been any challenges or difficulties in expanding this story out into Cave's kind of thrust stage?
You know, I never thought about it as a challenge or a difficulty, because what actually impressed me about Cave, when I walked into Cave Theater for the first time, I'd been here about 4 years ago to do a workshop with theater art students. I remember the first time I walked into that theater, I was like, this is a great space. I never thought of it as a cavern space. I think the Cave is actually a pretty intimate theater. But what's so great about it is the audience is actually always pretty close, but you do have all this cubic volume. So you can have the audience close to the experience, but still create a sense of vastness in the world. And so that was one of the first things Jane and I talked about in the physical production. We wanted to capture the sense of vastness. You know, the idea, the image that I couldn't get out of my head was of Matthew on that fence in all of that vastness, so utterly, utterly, utterly alone. And then this idea that Laramie is such a landlocked, isolated town, and people talk about in the play that sense of feeling separate, feeling other. And so we wanted to capture a sense of vastness in the physical production. The intimacy then comes out of how then do you talk to the actors about bringing the characters to life? How do their performances transcend beyond the edge of the stage? And so in terms of the acting choices, I've talked a lot with the actors, as some of the cast members in the room will probably attest that I've been banging the drum, but about things about like vocal energy. You know, you can make a choice to bring a character to life, but then how do you vocally support it in a way that would be different in a small venue versus a venue of this size? And you know, I've directed this play in a way that's probably a little different to capitalize on the size of the space, because you could have a generous sized playing area, that I probably wouldn't have directed it at all in the same way if we were in a tiny black box theater. So the space that you're in always does have an impact on the choices you make in terms of the staging, in terms of the physical production, and also in terms of the acting choices. But as I said, I never saw that actually as a challenge. In fact, I thought, what a perfect space for this play to be done in. And I think when you see, but you have seen the physical production, I think that you'll see those choices come to bear, and they've all been very carefully made. Oh, I thought you had a question. Any other question, Anne?
Freddie, we've talked some, you and I, about the process of, you know, Moises was here and Lee Degowski was here, and I've shared some of those videos and things with you. Will you talk a little bit, what you always kind of keep coming back to is the words are really the words of these very ordinary people. And I think I was out of the room yelling at the leaf blower when you talked about the idea of community. And Moises says over and over, this is a story about Laramie, not Maggie Sugar coming together. But just remembering that these are words from these ordinary but
That's a great point. I think that's actually the reason why this play has endured and why this play has become a classic, frankly. Because, you know, the folks of Tectonic could just as easily have gone to Laramie, interviewed people, and said, okay, now let's go back and write a fictional play about Laramie. They could have had the same community-minded intent and created a work of fiction or a work of abstracted nonfiction. But the act of actually using the words, I think, is extraordinarily powerful because it ennobles the experience of the citizens of Laramie and it gives dignity to that experience. And I think artists feel often that we can improve upon the everyday and the ordinary, and sometimes we can't. Sometimes that's what you need to hear, that honesty. I think it was very brave of them to include so many opposing points of view in the play. And one thing I said to the cast early on in the process is, doesn't matter what your worldview is, doesn't matter what your politics are, doesn't matter what your leanings are. If you come to this play, you're going to see your point of view reflected. And you're going to have your point of view challenged. Doesn't matter who you are. You're going to have both of those experiences within the course of this play. And for the play to do that in a way that is very balanced, they absolutely had to use the words of the people themselves. And I think there's actually something very spiritual then that emerges out of the play. In fact, I've been talking for the last couple of nights to the actors about this one moment in the play, which I won't spoil for you now, but this one moment in the play that is a highly spiritual moment and a highly sacred moment in all senses of that word. And so how to approach this particular moment, recognizing that this one act that the characters are doing on stage is a sacred act. And like I said, I think you'll know what I mean when you see the play, but it's very important to me that the experience of the real people who lived through it is honored in that way. Other questions? I think we're probably got maybe a couple of minutes too.
Can we,
Are we at time now?
can we plug the events?
Yes.
that
Yes.
we have in play?
Sure. We certainly hope you'll come and see our show. It opens next Wednesday. It's 7:30 Wednesday to Friday night, and then it's 2 o'clock performance on Saturday. After all the shows, there'll be the opportunity to interact with Freddie, and we'll also have some folks there that you might also talk with about your experience at the performance. I know Freddie's also going to be talking to some student groups over the course of the next few days, continuing the discussion, and we're very excited about that. You can go to our website. We have a tremendous amount of information, all sorts of links you can go to get more information about the Laramie Project and about our department and how to come see the show. We'd love for you to help us share the love of the Laramie Project at Hendrix on Facebook and Twitter and all those other things that I don't know how to use.
Hashtag HDXLaramie.
That's right. We'd love for you to help us with that. I know we all want to thank Freddie for being with us today. You're just terrific. Thank you. We want to thank the Hendrix Murphy Foundation for their generous support of this program and letting us, all the directors, one of the things they say to me is, when can we come back? Mm-hmm. They say, God, this is the best gig in town. And it is. There's so many special things about being able to come to a place like Hendrix and do what you've always wanted to do, which I think is what I say to the directors, what do you want to do? Well, what do I have to do? I said, what would you like to do? And so it's just tremendous for everybody involved. So come see us. Thank you, Hendrix Murphy, and come see our play. Thank you.
Thank you.